The United Kingdom activated the Citizen Clarity Network, linking surveillance, spending, travel and health data into one live profile for every person. Officials called it clarity, safety, efficiency. People called it the digital prison. Doors scanned faces, payments demanded ID. The system didn't ask, it declared. And at the centre of it all stood Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the figure many blamed for pushing the system forward. As activation alerts spread across the country, his silence became its own kind of signal. To protesters, it felt like he had chosen the network over the nation. And the backlash gathered speed long before he said a single word. This wasn't the beginning. It was the moment the truth became visible. And in that moment, millions moved, not in fear, but in refusal, toward the streets, toward each other, toward whatever came next.
It's hugely significant, but there have been gremlins with the technology, there have been mistakes. The police are telling us the technology's dramatically improved. It's the old argument, what have you got to fear?
We are the power, we are the 99%! We will not comply, we will resist.
The scary system that sees everything. To understand why streets filled so quickly, one must first understand what the Citizen Clarity Network is designed to do. Government spokespeople describe it as an efficiency tool, a harmonising platform that integrates information the state already holds into a single, coherent picture. They repeat steadily that no entirely new form of surveillance has been created, that systems have merely been connected. Yet connection itself is a form of power. What was once fragmented and forgettable can, when unified, become overwhelming. The network can show where a person tapped a public transport card that morning. It can list which prescriptions they collected in the last month. It can note every instance when their mobile telephone was present near a recorded protest. It can mark the frequency of failed electronic payments. It can record how often their device has been in the same location as someone already labelled by the algorithm as a potential risk. Any single fact might be trivial. Together, the facts become a biography written in data instead of words. The Citizen Clarity Network assigns each individual a trust index, a single numerical score derived from thousands of behavioural signals. This score is not officially called a social credit rating, but it behaves like one. A higher score means fewer frictions. A lower score can mean more questions, extra checks, unexplained delays. Employers may view it when hiring. Banks may consider it when granting credit. Housing authorities and school admissions offices may be quietly influenced by it without ever acknowledging that influence allowed. The government insists that participation is voluntary. Leaked internal documentation uses a different term, baseline. Once public services, banks, employers and transport systems all rely on this baseline, declining to participate becomes less a choice and more a form of practical exile. One line in one confidential memorandum revealed to the public crystallises the danger. Non-compliant profiles may temporarily lose access to essential digital services until identity is fully verified. In a society where wages, rent, healthcare access, transportation and even social contact increasingly pass through digital systems, the word temporarily reads not as comfort but as warning. The first leak. The mass mobilisation did not begin with a formal statement. It began with a photograph of a restricted slide on a briefing screen. Someone inside the government's central district captured an image of a presentation headed Citizen Clarity Network Phase 3 Activation Approved. In the corner sat the date unmistakably today. At the bottom glowed a stylo signature that resembled that of the Prime Minister. The photograph jumped from one private group chat to another with the ruthless efficiency of alarm. Is this genuine? They have activated it already. I thought this was still under consultation. Confusion lasted only moments before being replaced by anger. A second leak followed close behind, a cropped image of a paragraph from a confidential risk assessment. Phrases glowed like hazard lights, behavioural anomaly triggers, access limitation protocols and compliance reinforcement. What had felt like speculation now had vocabulary. In Manchester, a delivery driver with overdue bills looked at the words behavioural anomaly and for the first time saw his precarious existence as a data pattern to be judged. In Cardiff, a secondary school teacher thought of pupils whose parents avoided official channels, fearful of deportation or old debts. In Glasgow, a nurse who frequently missed her own medical appointments because of double shifts wondered what her trust index might already look like on a screen. On social media platforms, phrases long muttered quietly finally burst into the open. Digital prison. Turn it off. We did not consent. Users shared the leaks faster than any official denial could be drafted. By the time government accounts insisted that the system was safe, controlled and misunderstood, the square outside Parliament was already filling. The flood doorways became crossroads. People who had never attended a protest found themselves pulling coats over their shoulders and improvising signs from cardboard boxes. The decision did not feel ideological. It felt defensive. The question was no longer whether the system might someday be abused. It was whether that abuse had quietly begun. In London, commuters emerged from underground stations and were immediately swallowed by crowds flowing toward the centre of power. "We are not profiles," read one hastily painted banner. "Delete the prison," read another, the paint still drying as it waved above heads. Telephones rose into the air, their cameras recording and broadcasting the moment that fear turned into motion. In Birmingham, groups of newly graduated students walked shoulder to shoulder with middle-aged workers, still dressed in reflective jackets from long shifts. Their steps faltered at first, then found rhythm in shared chants. In Leeds, a woman leaving a hospital after 12 hours of work was drawn into a stream of strangers whose anger felt like a tide too strong to resist. In Belfast, the protest was suffused with memories of earlier eras when surveillance and border control had already carved communities into categories of permitted and unpermitted movement. From the air, footage captured branching arteries of movement in Manchester, Cardiff, Glasgow, Newcastle, Bristol and Sheffield. Roads filled faster than police officers could redirect them. Sirens competed with chants. Traffic lights flickered uselessly above rivers of people claiming space that usually belonged to cars. Not everyone in the streets opposed the network. Smaller groups formed near police stations and municipal buildings, holding printed signs that said security saves lives, that praised data-driven policing and crime prevention. They feared fraud, violence and disorder more than they feared a database. In countless homes, others watched without moving, fingers scrolling through live streams, shoulders tight with conflicting feelings. They distrusted the system and feared the consequences of resisting it. They were tired of being told that this crisis, like the previous crisis and the one before that, required their quiet compliance. They were also tired of nights that ended in broken windows. The country behaved like a single nervous system reacting to a sudden invasive shock. From its firing neurons in the streets, attention shifted to the brain that believed it controlled those limbs. Rooms of control.
Stop there! Stop there! Stop where you are! Get off! Get off! Don't make off! Get off! Get off! Get off the boy! Wait, when was this? Okay.
In government operation centres, the protests appeared not as faces but as pulsing zones of colour on large screens. One map displayed concentrations of mobile devices in real time, glowing brightest where crowds were thickest. Another showed the status of key infrastructure, transport nodes, hospitals, police deployments. Yet another traced the emotional weather of the nation, converting social media posts into sentiment scores that rose and fell by the second. Civil servants and advisors spoke in a vocabulary that translated human fear into manageable variables. They discussed risk filters and attenuation zones, escalation curves and containment strategies. They debated whether restricting certain information flows would calm or inflame the situation, One analyst warned that any visible attempt to limit discussion would be screenshotted, exposed and interpreted as proof of conspiracy. In Downing Street, advisors encircled the Prime Minister with pages of briefing notes and tablets glowing with live information. They argued over whether he should attempt to reach the House of Commons for a visible traditional statement or address the public through screens. Every suggested path intersected with images of crowds filling avenues and bridges. On one status panel, the Citizen Clarity Network flickered between reassuring words and alarming ones. Core systems, active. Data intake, high. Behavioural. Filters, unstable. Public confidence, degraded. There was no line item for legitimacy. A junior analyst, eyes red from staring at monitors, murmured that the system had been pushed live too fast. With too many unanswered questions, no one contradicted her. The silence did the work of agreement. In that moment, the realisation dawned that the country was not merely reacting to a new piece of technology, it was reacting to an entire philosophy of governance. Starmer in the crosshairs.
Leader of the opposition, why aren't you opposing the government?
Ugly scenes at the heart of Westminster as Sir Keir Starmer was confronted by a mob outside Parliament, subjected to a barrage of insults.
Outside Parliament, the air felt dense as if it carried both moisture and static electricity. Flares ignited intermittently, staining statues and stonework with trembling orange light. Chants rolled back and forth like surf between opposing shorelines. Vehicles carrying the Prime Minister attempted to navigate a side street cleared by police lines only moments earlier. Protesters flowed after them, drawn by the movement itself, raising telephones to record the glint of black paint and tinted glass. Signs rose higher. "We are not property. Scan yourself. Come out and log in with us." The motorcade altered course, attempting to bypass the densest parts of the crowd. Yet every redirection was anticipated by a populace that had learned over many years to move faster than formal plans. People cut through alleys and side roads, arms linked, voices raw. Later that night and throughout the next day, countless clips circulated showing one car in particular reversing away from the crowd. Captions shouted that the Prime Minister had fled from millions, that he had run from his own creation. The truth that he was being rerouted through a secured interior passage for both his safety and that of nearby protesters did not fit easily into that narrative. The camera framed retreat. The story followed the frame. What mattered most in that instant was not the security protocol of a government convoy. It was the feeling in the square that power had flinched. For those who felt unheard for years, that impression was more meaningful than any later clarification. Inside the homes. The roar of the streets had echoes behind closed doors. In a small flat above a busy takeaway restaurant in South London, a mother pressed a square of paper over her laptop camera and smoothed the edges with steady fingers. Her teenage daughter scoffed, then turned her own telephone face down. On the television, a presenter spoke in soothing phrases about temporary adjustments and measured responses. The word temporary rang hollow in a living room already dented by past promises that had stretched far beyond their supposed expiry dates. In a quiet cul-de-sac in the Midlands, an elderly woman in a heavy coat approached a bus and tapped her travel card against the reader. The machine flashed a message requesting verification through a mobile application she did not own. The driver apologised, helpless. She stepped back onto the pavement, humiliation flush on her cheeks, before turning to begin the long walk home. The bus pulled away, carrying away not only passengers but a piece of her assumption that public services existed for everyone. In a student house in Manchester, 4 friends sat around a cluttered table, the glow from a single laptop reflecting in their eyes. Live streams showed crowds they were too anxious to join. Anxiety turned inward instead. One by one, they scrolled through years of online posts and erased them. Jokes that once seemed harmless now felt like evidence awaiting misinterpretation. In a cramped flat in Bristol, a software engineer leaned over his keyboard and watched server logs scroll upward. Lines of text reported trust index adjustments, flagged behaviours, auto-generated suggestions for follow-up. He recognised functions he had written months earlier, convinced at the time that he was building neutral tools. Those tools now carried out judgments at a scale he could hardly comprehend. He closed the terminal window and stared at his hands, wondering what responsibility a coder bears for the uses of their code. In Newcastle, a father tucked his child into bed under a blanket patterned with cartoon planets. When she asked why people outside were shouting, he tried to explain the idea of being watched. Halfway through the explanation, he realised she could not remember a time when cameras and digital signatures had not quietly recorded nearly everything she did. For her, the digital prison was not an intrusion. It was merely the latest update, the 2.7 million. As the night deepened, the protest acquired a new identity. It became a number. Someone somewhere typed into a comment beneath a live video stream that it felt as though 2,700,000 people were on the streets. No source was cited, no method was described. The assertion spread anyway. Other accounts repeated it, rounding it up, rounding it down, reinforcing it through sheer repetition. Graphic designers sympathetic to the movement created stylised maps of the United Kingdom with red flares wherever crowds were thickest and stamped the phrase 2.7 million across them in bold letters. Talk shows cited the figure with only the briefest acknowledgement that it was unverified. Protesters shouted the number through megaphones, turning it into a syllabic chant. Government representatives replied with cautious language about significant turnouts and large-scale gatherings. Their refusal to name a number made the unofficial one feel more solid by contrast. People began to refer to the event not as a protest, but as the March of 2.7 million. Whether the true count was lower or higher mattered less with each passing hour. The number had ceased to function as a measurement and had become a symbol. It told those who marched that they were not fringe, that they were many and powerful. It told those who stayed home that something vast had happened without them. It told those in power that any attempt to downplay the moment would look absurd in the face of such scale, invented or not. Once a number becomes myth, no future study can entirely dislodge it. Statistical reports prepared in calm offices months later might estimate a range, but they will never be shared with the same fervour as that first emphatic claim. Distorted signal.
We don't believe they've made that case.
Alongside the countless genuine images of crowds, another layer of media emerged, less honest and more contagious. Old footage of a far smaller demonstration from several years earlier was rebranded as scenes from that night. The buildings in the background and the fashions of the crowd did not match, but the flames and the shouts did. And that was enough for some viewers. Artificially generated videos appeared depicting the Prime Minister announcing permanent emergency measures, his voice and face recreated with unnerving fidelity. They were shared tens of thousands of times before labels appeared indicating that they were fabricated. Even after such corrections, the images persisted. In screenshots stripped of any context, one channel opposed to the protests looped brief clips of broken windows and minor scuffles beneath headlines suggesting that the entire country was on fire. Another channel, supportive of the movement, edited hours of footage into sequences that showed only peaceful marching and smiling families, omitting moments where frustration boiled over into aggression. Each side accused the other of deception while quietly crafting its own curated reality. Underneath these competing narratives, comment sections became battlegrounds. I was there, this never happened, wrote one person under a misleading clip. Do your research, another replied, linking to equally partial evidence. Long, careful explanations drawing distinctions between fact and fiction garnered few reactions. Short, furious statements travelled faster. When everyone holds a broadcast device in their hand and everyone is a potential subject of surveillance truth struggles, it is slow, hesitant, laden with qualification. Falsehood is swift, confident and beautifully edited. The truth can win, but only if it survives long enough to be heard. The moral algorithm. The digital prison did not appear overnight. It formed in layers like sediment on a riverbed. A camera was installed on a street corner after a violent incident. A database retained more information during a health crisis. An employer requested access to applicants' online histories to ensure cultural fit. A school introduced a behaviour tracking application that sent reports directly to guardians' telephones. Individually, each step was framed as reasonable. Cameras protect. Data helps doctors and planners. Employers must protect their reputations. Schools must monitor attendance and well-being. Over time, the sum of these reasonable steps produced something unreasonable. A society in which being constantly observed felt normal and questioning that observation felt radical. The Citizen Clarity Network simply traced a circle around what already existed and gave it a name. It promised fairness through data, impartiality through algorithms, safety through analysis at a scale no human could match. Yet algorithms do not understand context. They understand correlation. They cannot see missed rent as a symptom of an exploitative job market. They cannot see a missed appointment as the choice of a parent caring for a sick child. They cannot see a crowd as a collection of individuals with different reasons for being there. A trust index that drops because an algorithm declares someone a higher risk will rarely explain itself. To challenge it, one must first know it exists, then understand how it was constructed, then persuade a system that believes itself objective to admit fallibility. Most people do not have that time, that knowledge, or that access. The protests were many things at once. A rejection of specific policies, an outcry against unaccountable power, a venting of accumulated economic and social frustration. Above all, they were a loud refusal to let unseen calculations quietly determine whose life is smoothed and whose is obstructed. Aftershock. By morning, the volume of the previous night had fallen away, leaving behind the quieter work of interpretation. Streets that had pulsed with voices and banners now hosted council employees washing away chalk slogans. Damp cardboard signs, once held high, slumped in gutters. The remnants of flares were swept into plastic bags. Public transport resumed, though many routes remained diverted. Bus shelters displayed fresh notices about earlier disruptions. People boarded trains with the alert fatigue of those who have lived through too many extraordinary events. Offices reopened, though conversations at desks felt different, heavier. Government communications accounts released statements in carefully calibrated language. There was talk of listening, of engaging with legitimate concerns, of temporarily suspending selected functions of the Citizen Clarity Network while oversight mechanisms were strengthened. The word temporarily appeared again, this time flanked by assurances of independent review and parliamentary scrutiny. Protest organisers claimed victory. They pointed to internal status screens leaked like the first, showing sections of the network marked as paused. Supporters of the system argued that national security had been jeopardised by mobs, that giving in to public pressure on matters of safety set a dangerous precedent. Officials insisted that no operational decisions had been taken in response to demonstrations, insisting instead that reviews had always been planned. In office buildings across the country, new folders appeared on shared drives labelled contingency strategies, public trust frameworks, data governance revisions. It was not yet clear whether they contained the seeds of meaningful change or only more sophisticated methods of control. Two voices, one street, on a grey morning. At a modest bus stop in northern England, two strangers waited for a delayed bus. One wore a half-unzipped uniform jacket and held a riot helmet under his arm. A police officer who'd spent the night holding a line between protesters and the building they believed housed their enemy. The other, a systems architect, clutched a laptop bag to his chest after a night watching graphs and logs that turned people into coloured lines and error messages. They recognised each other's roles in small gestures. The officer massaging the bridge of his nose, the architect's eyes flicking toward passing cameras. Silence lingered, shaped by shared fatigue. The officer nodded toward the other's lanyard, the logo of a tech contractor still visible. "You work with all that?" he said. The architect nodded. "You?" "Was on the line near Parliament." Another pause. Both knew they had, in different ways, served the same system, now under fire. "My mother called last night," the officer said, smiling faintly. "She hoped I wasn't on whatever they'd switched on. Said she didn't want them watching me too." The architect chuckled wearily. "Mine called as well. She hoped I wasn't the one who built it." They laughed softly, a sound carrying more truth than comfort. The bus arrived with a hiss. They boarded, tapped their cards, and the system allowed them through. For that morning, at least, their trust indexes were still sufficient. The story we tell about control. What happened on the night of the digital prison protest will not be defined by official reports or audits. It will be defined by the stories people tell, the clips they share, the numbers they believe, and the silences they keep. Some will say that citizens rose to defend freedom and forced a retreat from an intolerable level of surveillance. They will tell it as proof that resistance still matters. Others will argue that a vital modernisation of public safety was sabotaged by hysteria and misinformation, pointing to threats once thwarted by data and warning that delay costs lives. Many will hold both fears at once. Fear of being watched and fear of being unprotected, knowing that good and bad actors exist everywhere, not only in government. They will sense that neither version is fully honest. The Citizen Clarity Network may be renamed, rebranded, or quietly resurrected under a new law. The protests may become a symbol or fade into a footnote in the long march toward more integrated systems. The phrase digital prison may disappear while its mechanisms seep quietly into daily life. The question remains simple yet unanswerable. How much control over our lives are we willing to surrender for safety and convenience we cannot easily verify or revoke? Who decides that trade on our behalf, and what happens when we realise the bargain was unfair? We've walked through the flick of a digital switch, the surge of bodies in the streets, the sterile calm of control rooms, the anxious quiet of living rooms, the myths of numbers, the distortions of feeds, the ethics tangled in algorithms, and the uneasy calm of the morning after. Now the story belongs not to systems or commentators, but to you. What will you choose to trust? What will you choose to question? And when the next switch is flipped, will you hear it in time to decide whether to stay inside or step into the street? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective shapes the story that follows. Subscribe to keep exploring how technology, power, and human choice intersect in the world we're building. Like this piece if it made you pause, and let's keep the conversation going.